Hi, I'm Rebecca Adams, the President of First Light Widowed Association. Welcome to Widow Talk, real conversations about the stuff people just don't talk about. Today we're chatting to Carren Stapleton, who's also a member of the First Light Management Committee. Carren started First Light with me many years ago. Carren lost her beloved husband Dave in 2013 to a heart attack. So today we're going to be talking a little bit about those first few weeks and months and what the first year looked like for Carren. So Carren, are you able to tell us, I'm sorry.
Hi, Beck. Hi, everyone.
Are you able to tell us a little bit about Dave? So how did you meet and what was your life together like?
So Dave and I had worked together for many years, and in 2004 we started dating after both of us had marriage breakups in the preceding years. So we started dating. At that stage we weren't working in the same area together, but broadly within the organisation. So we moved forward and started dating, and in 2009 we got married, and we had, both of us had children from our previous marriages, so we started a blended family, and we just had a blessed life. We were both working full time, so we had a busy life with kids coming and going, and two kids that live with us full time, and the two kids that were coming and going, and so our life was just on the go. We squeezed in as much as we could all the time because our experience told us that you just don't waste a minute. So we had a great life together, and he was the life of the party, and an incredible friend and confidant to a lot of people. Was big and blokey, and a wicked sense of humour. No topic was off bounds, quite dark humour at times as well. It was a blessed, great life. Yeah.
Okay. And then Dave's death was obviously very unexpected, suffering a heart attack. Can you tell us a little bit about that horrible day?
Yeah. So Dave was working at the time, and he was a shift worker. So I hadn't seen him. I had seen him late the night before, about midnight. He'd gotten home after work and going and spending some time with his daughter. And we had a quick, brief conversation, and I went to sleep. I waited up to see him, went to sleep, and then he got up early because he had a shift, went to work normal. Because we often didn't see each other for days on ends, we'd be passing ships with shift work. We would always call each other during the day if we hadn't seen each other to make sure we touch base. So I had done that once I got to work that morning and was expecting a phone call back. When I got a phone call back, it wasn't him, it was one of his bosses at work who said he'd passed out and they were taking him to hospital. He was okay, but would I like to meet them there? So I knew that was just so unlike him. So I just packed up, bolted out, and got to the hospital, and he'd had a massive heart attack after he had walked into the hospital, and they worked so hard on him, but he never regained consciousness and passed away. And our world just turned upside down within a 2-hour period. So suddenly life was not how we knew it anymore. So yeah.
Yeah, what a shock. I mean, I know when my husband passed away, those first few weeks were just a blur because of the shock. So what emotions did you go through over that period, and how did you and your family cope in those early days?
So it was a lot of that shock, absolutely, and that disbelief, and that walking through, well, not even walking, dragging yourself through the sticky mud that surrounds everything you do, and just trying to put one foot in front of another. But at the same time, it was also very much, I went into go on automatic pilot mode in many respects. And so obviously we were able to get the family to the hospital at some point. So I was surrounded at the hospital with friends and family, and we were all devastated. And we had some additional friends and family come to support the family as well. So I'd called some additional people to make sure that everyone sort of had someone, I guess, as a support person with them, as devastated as we all were. So there was a lot of that. So the first few weeks was being surrounded by and being lifted up in many respects and being carried forward with decisions that had to be made. Physically, I have a lot of memory loss around that time. Apparently there were conversations I had with people, which is very clear to them, which I have no recollection of. I don't recall cooking a meal because everyone was in the house. So there was always someone there either dropping off food, or my parents were there, my mother was there, my dad was in hospital, unfortunately. But between my family and extended family and Dave's family, there were just a house full of people for a few weeks. Dave's family had his sister, and sister's family lived interstate, and his brother lived overseas. So it took some time to get them to be able to be with us. Obviously, his sister was able to come that evening, but by the time the rest of the family and his brother and sister-in-law who lived in the States were able to get here, it was, quite a while, I guess a fewer days, more time rather than what is normal. So yeah, there was a lot of that in that initial 2 weeks. I didn't sleep. I don't recall sleeping much at all. Maybe I got a couple of hours a night. Very much just automatic pilot, but also that first year, in many respects, I refer to it as a bit of a year of I just feel like I was a zombie, just walking around doing life, but not really connected to it in many ways.
I remember that busy period, and then there's that shift when everybody starts slowly going back to their lives, and you find yourself so distracted with the busyness and, as you said, carried forward. Do you remember that change when people started to kind of have to return and pull away, and then you felt the difference of like the house being empty again, and how that changed?
Yeah, and it was probably a couple of I guess 2 weeks, 2 weeks or so, 2 to 3 weeks. Obviously, my close family friends would still come and check in and be in the house from time to time, but the family that was staying with me went back to their work and all the things that they have to do. Yeah, it was a few weeks later that it was that silence in the house, particularly as the kids were all in school. They were all in high school and above, so they weren't around all day, every day. So I think at that time it was, I think that's when I probably really gave myself and had the space to fall apart myself, in those quiet days where the kids had left for school for the day, and I had these 7 hours or so that I could just not have to talk to anyone, do anything, be anything, and I could just curl up if I needed to, mindlessly watch, put the TV on but not know what was in front of me. Those are the days that that probably I truly was the first time that I was able to just fall apart and cry and cry and cry and cry, and then start again each day.
Did you notice your grief changing through the months? Like as that initial period, as you said, you sort of settled into what life was going to be like for you once everybody left. What were some of the biggest challenges that you can remember kind of going through over the first few months, and how did things start to change from what you can remember? Because as we know, it is a bit of a blur.
Yeah, so I guess, I mean, one of the big things that's always a big thing, I guess, for everyone is that going through all those legalities around the house, the estate, and so on. We did have wills in place, so we were lucky in that regard. And my childhood best friend luckily for me, just came in. So she's a lawyer, so I was blessed to have someone who just went, whatever you need in that space, on top of anything else she did, but whatever you need in that specific space, I will. And we had done our wills through her. So she just, I had that guidance and support, which was amazing, because even though we had wills, there were legal dramas around the superannuation, which became very lengthy. And so dealing with the estate was something that I had to do and needed to do, but it became quite difficult. And if I hadn't had that support legally from someone to help me navigate some of those issues, I don't know how I would have got through that. So one of the things that I can say is, if you face different issues, whether if you can reach out and you've got someone even in your extended circle that has that financial understanding or legal understanding or health understanding, whatever it is, education, if you've got issues with your kids' school, like, don't be afraid to take the help that they offer. Even if you just have that conversation with them, and having conversations with those people in my life who could guide me was invaluable as I look back on it now. And so I'm really grateful that, one, they reached out, but also that they gave that support when I needed it, because being able to process information became really difficult for me. And that was one of the things I struggled with, because, you know, I had a career for 20 plus years and I dealt with lots of information and made these decisions in my professional life. And now I was in a place where I would read a paragraph over and over again and could not work out what it said, because I just couldn't process what it meant anymore. So that physical reaction to grief was something that really stunned me in many respects, and took me a long time to understand that was the grief operating on my brain, not the fact that it was me as such. And it was going to take time for me to work that through, but also it would come back, and it did come back in time. I could read things better. Eventually my sleep patterns, although they took a long time, came back into place. I didn't cry all the time, but I cried every day for 6 months. And I thought 6 months into it, with all the stuff going on, I just must be crazy now. This is just, I don't know who I am. I stopped recognizing who I was as a person. But while I stopped recognizing who I was as a person, I kept doing all the things that needed to be done. So I was still on automatic pilot, but the kids were fed, kids went to school each day. We turned up to the things we had to turn up. But in some respects, I felt like I was a shell of myself.
Yeah, you really do lose yourself, don't you? That's such a good advice about having that advocate. I'm incredibly lucky that my sister is an accountant, and she stepped into that space for me. I remember her taking me to appointments with the bank and the lawyer to talk about the will, and she pretty much wheeled me in. I sat there, participated as much as I could. She wrote everything down and then took me home, and then later on she'd remind me what had happened. That's such good advice. If you can have access to someone like that who can be more organised while you're just not able to process the information that you're having to deal with. It's such a difficult time.
Absolutely, Beck. And I think the point you make is really good as well. If you don't have someone who has that specific expertise, but if you've got a friend who is very organised and can just come with you, as you said, and write down that information and ask some of the questions on your behalf, you can always go back and revisit it. But it takes revision and revision and revision to get some of those things through to you. So honestly, I'm so grateful. And I think your point is really good as well. So just reach out to someone in your life and get them to come along to those really important meetings that you're dreading in your own self of having to get through, but having someone there beside you is the best thing I can recommend.
Definitely. And that term that we've spoken about and we've come to know, that widow brain, where you just forget everything. You can be a fully capable person, have had a great career, and then you just actually can't remember what day the bins go out. Like
No,
it is just
exactly.
totally normal. Not crazy, totally normal.
Yeah, definitely. And that widow brain aspect really was, I've always been a bit of a list person, so that was great. But the list that I then had to start making were things like put the bins out, have a shower, kids' lunches, all the things that I would do as a matter of course suddenly became things that I had to remind myself to do, and were big things that I had to do that were exhausting for me to do. And it would physically, emotionally exhaust me just getting through the day, let alone all the extra things that I would normally do. So having a list, and even just if I, was able to cross out 2 things, which was take out the bins, and have the kids' lunches that day, then it was like, oh my God, I did something today. And I reminded myself at the end of the day that I had done something, as small as they were, because I just didn't feel like I was getting through that sticky mud much at all.
Definitely. Which is a great segue, because I wanted to talk to you about tactics. I remember someone told me very early on that the only way to get through grief is to go through it. So that advice to me meant that trying to avoid it or distract myself and not process the emotion, or numb myself, was only going to postpone the inevitable. That you can't get around it. You can't skip the grieving period. So can you tell us a little bit about some of the tactics that you applied to help you cope with your grief? What helped you, and maybe what didn't help?
Yeah, so I think those lists, and reminding myself that I did achieve something each day, as small as it was very helpful for me, because eventually those things on those lists got longer and I could do more each day. And it also kept, time becomes a really bizarre thing, I think, when you're grieving as well. Hours can slip by and you have no idea that those hours have slipped by. And so it sort of gave me that reminder. I'd look at something and go, okay, I better get on to that, because I would check the time. Whereas in those really early grief days, I would have no concept of time other than it was dark and it was light. So that was really helpful, obviously. Some of the things, you definitely do need to sit with it, giving myself permission to fall apart. And for me, I would tend to do that when I was by myself, but didn't mean that I didn't cry with other people. I certainly did that. But that really wrenching grief was, when I was often by myself. So, crying in the shower and spending very long time in the shower with the water and the tears and everything, and allow myself to just get that out, was something that over time was obviously very helpful as well. I was probably about 8 months into it. I obviously was reaching out and talking to people, but within the sort of 6 months, I really didn't want to talk to anyone who hadn't known Dave. And so because I wanted to share their stories, and then when I said something, they would go, oh yeah, he was so like that. And so that shared discussion and talking with people and sharing those stories and reflecting on who he was as a person, and missing that so much, but acknowledging that that was who he was helpful. But then I had a very good a colleague of mine who reached out in the early days, who was a psychologist, and we just met and had coffee and chatted. And he had said to me, do you want to talk to someone? I can help you find the right person. And I said, no. And I was like, no, I don't want to talk to anyone who didn't know Dave. I don't want to do that. So it's like, okay, that's fine. So keep talking who you're talking to, and that's good. But everyone's here for you. And so having that reassurance from people was great. And then I was probably about 6 months in, after crying every day, thinking I was going crazy, that I was losing my mind and losing myself as a person, and not recognizing myself anymore in my life anymore. I reached out to him again and said, I think I'm ready to talk to someone. And that's when I got some recommendations for him and did a bit of counselling. And that was helpful. One, it told me that I wasn't going crazy, that I was grieving, and that was okay. And all the things that I was doing in my grief were perfectly normal as part of grief. And so that became a bit of an epiphany. And so I was then like, okay, I'm not doing this thing wrong, because people expect it in different ways. So instead of feeling like, well, I must be grieving wrong because, the movies tell you that you stop crying after a couple of months, but I'm still crying 6 months in, so it reassured me that it was just going to be the time it took for me individually, and the strategies around being physically active and going for a walk and being in the sunshine and making sure you're eating right and all those things that we are told every day become incredibly important when you are grieving as well. And so holding on to a lot of those things is something that I did that found very helpful. Yeah. And what wasn't helpful?
Yes.
Yeah, that's actually a tough one, because I think even the things that at the time may not be helpful point you in a direction of what is helpful. Obviously, certainly was drinking a bit more, and that's not always helpful. But in the early days, it also was one of the things that allowed me to feel I could let go, because I'm a bit of a controlled person generally. So for someone who's spent their life being quite controlled, allowing yourself to let go is difficult. And in grieving, as you said, sitting in it and being in it and acknowledging it and it being hard and dirty and awful was something that that doesn't sit comfortably with me necessarily. And so the alcohol, in some respects, while not healthy, and overuse of it is never healthy, it also allowed me to just, really fall apart at times and then wake up in the morning and know I had to rebuild myself. So, yeah, but I know there were certainly times that, and certainly in that first year, getting through those really hard firsts, I'd get through them and then I would turn to have a big night, on the booze. Yeah, because it was a release for me, but it's not something you can maintain. Something certainly I couldn't maintain. But there's also, I still give my permission to do that now, though. On those, I don't, there are months that are really hard for me still, 7 years down the track, and so I just go, well, it's just, you're going to pull yourself out of this, but it's okay if this is what it's going to be for a week or a couple of weeks, because that's okay too.
Yeah. And something else I think that's really helpful to talk about is self-care, which is a term that I was not familiar with before my husband passed away. I was used to being the person that looked after everybody else. Yep. And when someone first suggested that I think about self-care, I felt that it was quite indulgent and selfish, and it took me a long time to be comfortable with recognising how to fill up my own cup and look after myself. So did you try some different tactics for self-care? Was that new for you? And how did you kind of make sure that you were looking after yourself when life was so busy with kids? And
yeah, and I think my self-care changed. I guess previously one of the things that I had done was I would always read for pleasure myself, but because my brain wasn't working the way it used to, reading a novel just flew out the window. So that's how I would often regenerate and take that time for myself, in the previous years. And to this day, I read every now and then, but I'm still not back to reading like I used to. And I have a stack of books beside my bed that I want to read, that I'm desperate to read, but the desire to read is not there like it used to be. So reading was something that I used to do for self-care that suddenly I couldn't do anymore. It just, like I said, the pages would blur and I'd read one page and keep reading one page. So I had to find new ways. Like I said, some of the self-care was I started walking every day because something in my brain, and previous conversations I had with people over the many years in my previous career, you know, had gone through and told me a lot of those things around, you know, make sure you're physically active. And, you know, so going out in the outside and walking the dog and making sure I walk the dog every day and being in the sunshine and the fresh air was something that I did for my self-care. And trying to make sure I regularly drank water, because we forget to do that as well. Again, a really basic thing, but really important. The other thing that I did, I guess, was that, because one of the things that is really hard, and I'm a hugger, I'm a touchy person naturally, so the whole virus thing is just driving me crazy because I can't hug my people even now. But I'm a hugger and I'm a toucher. I'm a toucher on the arm and all that sort of stuff. And so even though I had those people in my life to hug me and care for me and have that stuff, I would go and take myself for a massage. And so having that skin touch and having that skin hunger, because you don't have that anymore with your partner, was something that was really hard for me. And so one of the things I did is I would actually, you know, go, okay, go and get a massage. And so that was, I always felt much better after it, because I just had that sense, that touch, which was really important. And yeah, so that was sort of something that I did from time to time too, when I recognized that I was just on edge a little bit. And yeah, lots of different things, but you've got to find the right thing for you. That's the important thing. So the other thing I would say to people is that, you know, even if it's something you've never done before, just give it a go. You'll work out whether it's something that's going to work for you or not. So if you're not normally someone who goes for a massage, and you're not someone who doesn't like, you know, it's not a touch, then maybe that won't work for you. Maybe it will. Just give it a go and you'll soon work out. So not being afraid to try different things was also something that I think I did do. Just try something differently, give it a go and see if it resonates with me or not.
Yeah, that's great advice. And I remember too with the challenge, I tried to go for a walk. That was one of my self-care approaches, but there were days I just didn't have it in me. So I think giving myself a leave pass was also a big part of my self-care. And on the days I thought, I just can't walk today, I thought, get dressed and sit in the garden. Just let the sun hit your skin for 10 minutes. And then that, for me, that was ticking the box. So I guess, yeah, giving yourself a break every now and then too, and can be really helpful.
I one of the things that I was probably within the first couple of months, I was having a really, really bad day, and my best girlfriend rang me, and she would check in every day. She would just ring even if she didn't see me. How's today been? So it was late in the afternoon, and she said, how's today been? And I said, she said, what have you done? And I just, you know, I couldn't. And I said, I had a shower. And she laughed and she said, that's really good. Make sure you do that every day. And I went, oh, okay. And I said, okay, I will. And so on days that I just couldn't get out of bed and I couldn't do anything, I couldn't face the world. And we have days, and sometimes those days go for weeks on end, I would make sure at least I had a shower every day. And sometimes on those really bad days when I was really struggling with just literally getting out of bed or putting one foot in front of the other, that resonated in my head, and it stuck in my head to go, just have a shower. If you have a shower, you've done something today. But it's also a sense of self-care, because you know, you're looking after yourself as well.
Definitely, even if it means having that shower, putting your pajamas back on and getting back into bed.
Exactly. Going from one lying position to another, you know, one sitting position to another around the house, because you can't do more than that.
Definitely. I also want to touch on something that I guess was the foundation of how First Light started and how you and I met, was the drive to connect with other young widowed people. I know when my husband died, I didn't know anyone else who was widowed except for my grandmother, and certainly no one who had been widowed young and so recently into their life together. So I found that finding another young widow was a lifeline for me, because it made me feel that I wasn't alone and somebody could actually relate to me. I know that my family and friends were great, but nobody could really understand what I meant. When I sat down with another young widow and said, you know, I'm finding this hard, and they said, me too, that was life-changing for me. So How did you find the courage to go and connect with a stranger and talk about such a intimate part of your life? Can you tell us about when you decided to go and connect with other young widows and how that helped you?
Yeah, I was a little bit later to the party because one, it probably was a while before I actually realised and connected that I was a widow. And the first time someone called me that, it was a complete shock to me. But obviously perfectly reasonable and logical that they would refer to me in that way. And so I was just like, oh, yeah, well, okay. Yeah, I guess I am, that there's a term to it. Just hadn't, yeah. Anyway, so it was probably, I did have an incredible amount of family and friend support, and I still do. But having to reach out, I was probably about 12 months in for me when I wasn't sleeping again. So started searching the term widow late night in bed one night. And that's when I stumbled across and was on Facebook. I'd done a bit of, Google searching, and then I went, okay, well, let's see what's out there in Australia, and found a private Facebook group, and had to answer some questions to join. And I just took a breath and went, well, this is me. I'm a widow now. So I guess, let's see where this takes me in that widow journey, rather than just the grief and losing journey. And so that's when I reached out and found this, the online closed Facebook group. And that's the first time I connected. And it was that connection which also led us to meeting together in person for the first time. And I was still very anxious and nervous about that, really anxious and nervous about that, because, everyone tells you not to meet people on the internet, particularly those years ago. So we had organised a lunch on the other side of Brisbane to me. And so I got in the car and went, right, drive myself there, and sat in the car park, trying to talk myself into getting out of the car to walking in, and convinced myself that I could, and that if I walked in and I just spent 10 minutes there and didn't like it and thought, this is not for me, I could just walk my ass back out there and get in the car and go. And I've lost nothing other than I've gotten out of the house for an hour. So there's a win there. You're out of the house for an hour. And so I did. And you were at that first meeting, and Lauren was as well. So eventually, unbelievable, that first meeting together, this is where we ended up. But it was that first coffee lunch, that I went, oh, I felt like I could exhale. I didn't realize that there was so much that was just inside me still, and having to explain to family and friends some of those things, like the fact you're missing touch, or the fact there's this, or the fact there's that, and it's all tied up in this grief of losing your person, your intimate partnered person. You don't want to spend 20 minutes explaining that to someone. And when I met other people who are widowed, that Me Too moment, or that whole, oh yeah, well, let me also tell you what I've done, and you'd be like, oh, okay, so it's not just me. And so that was the first time that I really felt, right, there's some worth in this for me individually, and hopefully there's some worth in it for other people as well. So yeah, connecting with other widows was a light bulb moment for me. And I think it was probably one of the driving things that made me be able to start to take broader steps and move forward in much more leaps and bounds than what I had within that first year.
Okay, well, that's great. I'm really glad you came to that lunch that day.
Me too.
But now, some of my best friends are my widow friends. They're just such a special connection.
Yeah.
And then I guess just to wrap up, if you could think back to the Carren who was living life in those early days in 2013, what advice would you give to another young widow facing the recent loss of their person? If you could give them some words of advice.
So my words of advice would be, it's shit. It really is shit. and I'm sorry, but it's going to be shit for a while. But that's okay. Lean on and accept the help that's given, because people are genuine in that. They really are. And so don't push that away. It's okay to say no if it's something you don't want to have happen or you're not comfortable, and be strong to say no as well. You don't have to do everything someone else is telling you to do. Be strong in yourself when you're not feeling strong, but it's okay to lighten your load for a while. Give yourself permission to do that. And just make sure that you are doing some of that self-care, as little as it might be. Take some time just for you. As you said, sit in it, and it's okay if that means you are screaming in the backyard at the sky, or you are on the floor curled up crying. All of that is okay. And so tell yourself it's going to be okay, because eventually it will. And just know that when people tell you it will get better, it actually will get better. As much as you don't believe it ever will, eventually you will rediscover who you are, and it's probably not going to be exactly who you were before. And that in itself is sad. So also give yourself permission to grieve for who you were, and then find ways to rediscover and rebuild who you want to be in the future.
That's lovely advice. Thank you, Carren. Thank you so much for your generosity. Sharing your story with us is really beautiful. So thank you for that. I hope everybody has enjoyed our chat today and that it's helped in some way. Please take a look at our YouTube channel, and if you're interested in seeing more of our videos, you can subscribe. We're going to be having chats with a range of people on a range of topics, so we'd love to hear from you as well. You can find us at www.firstlight.org.au. You can see more of our videos and our programs, and you can reach out to us if you'd like us to talk about a particular topic, or if you'd like to be involved with First Light. We'd love to hear from you. So Carren, have a nice day. Thank you again, and we'll see you soon for more Widow Talk.
Definitely. Thanks, Beck. Bye, everyone.